Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to another episode of Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. So, in sort of honor of the episode of All Together Now that Styles and I recently did on Double Dragon Neon, which if you haven't gone and watched, you should check that out. That was a lot of fun, that one. We had a good time with that. In honor of that, I decided that it would be fitting to take a look at where that title's roots are. So, what we're going to be taking a look at today is actually two versions of the original Double Dragon. We're going to sort of do something a little bit different here today. And the reason for that is that Double Dragon was a very well-known arcade title, but it was also fairly popular and fairly well-known on the NES. That was partially because of it being featured in the god-awful Nintendo-themed movie The Wizard, but it was also just sort of popular in its own right because Double Dragon is a very iconic arcade brawler title, and it is one of the premier titles from Technos Japan Corp., which is a sadly now defunct developer who did a few different things but specialized in two things: beat-em-ups and beat-em-up themed sports games. Stuff like Super Dodgeball and Super Spike V-Ball, things like that. And the sort of just general brawlers is really where their specialty was, and I'm a big fan of their work. And Double Dragon is probably what they're best known for, but it's kind of funny. This is a game that, well, on reflection, it might be a little better served with your nostalgia tinted glasses on than in practicality. And I'm going to show both versions of it because it was popular on both systems, and there are some notable, particularly technical, but also some minor design differences between the two. So let's get this started here. So the story, if you want to call it that, is very simple. Your girlfriend gets knocked out and captured by street thugs while you're apparently working on your Trans Am in the garage, and your goal is to rescue her. And spoilers, if you are playing this two-player, which I am not, as you can plainly see, but if you are playing this two-player and you actually get to the end, both you and your co-op partner end up having to fight to see who wins Marion's affection. Yeah, I know, it's kind of lame, but at the time that was actually really impressive because, number one, not a lot of people saw it because few people finished arcade games, but also just because no one had ever really done anything like that before. You know, co-op games, two-player co-op games, especially with brawlers, are all too common, but to have a thing where it suddenly turns competitive right at the end was pretty edgy at the time, and I think it's really cool. But as you can see here, the basic concepts of this game are, well, pretty simple. You punch people, you kick people, and occasionally people have weapons. They drop the weapons when you knock them over, and you can take the weapons and use them against them, unless, of course, they knock you out, in which case you drop it. And the weapons they vary. You know, there's the whip that you saw there, there is the bat, which you see here, and they vary in effectiveness. But it's kind of cool because some enemies will come equipped with them, but not only that, if you actually drop yours, the enemies are often, they will very, very quickly rush back to pick them back up again. So it's not one of these things where once they drop the weapon, that's it. It's down and they'll never use it again. So you have to be very quick on your feet, actually, to ensure that you pick them up again and prevent them from doing it, because the enemies can be very vicious. This game, it's pretty hard and it's pretty cheap. Man, I'm going to totally go buy myself a Scoop Moto after this. It's kind of funny, given that this game is supposed to take place in the 80s, that this is a billboard for what is clearly a VW Beetle, but whatever. So, this game is pretty... Oh, look at the kitty! We got the little kitty up there, he's just smiling, chilling out, watching all the violence. Doesn't give a crap. It's a chill kitty. So as you see there he was running for the knife, and the knife is the knife is only a one-time use thing, but it's does a lot of damage if a guy manages to flick it off at you. You can also see here, you can't really see it right now, but to the right of the screen there is a barrel, and these are interesting items because you pick them up and then you throw them at the enemies, and if you time it right, you can actually hit multiple enemies with them simultaneously and get yourself a nice fat combo going. So the thing with this game is, I mean, being an arcade game, it was designed to get a bunch of money from you, so it's very, very cheap, it's very hard, and the computer plays dirty. It's definitely easier if you're in co-op, because if you're getting beat up by a particular enemy, you can have your co-op partner sort of come at them from the other side, break their attack, and sort of save your butt. Which happened a lot in Double Dragon Neon, if you watch that. So, if you're playing single player, you are most certainly at a disadvantage. And as you can see, you have a life bar down at the bottom. There's the iconic mid-mission music. It's not nearly as good in this. Music is actually one of this game's real shortcomings. The music in this game is pretty bad. It's like the songs are good. Actually, this game has some of the most iconic arcade music ever. But the composition and the way they utilize the music chip they had access to in this game is pretty lame. The music on the NES, in some ways, is actually quite a bit better. And yeah, Double Dragon as a whole is a really weird series, because, as you can see, this game was very well regarded when it came out in 1987, because for arcades at the time, it was very technically proficient. This was one of the early 16-bit arcade games. And graphically and animation-wise, it was actually fairly advanced compared to other stuff that was on the market at the time. And it got a lot of praise and attention for that. But as you can see, that came with a price with this new hardware that Technos was working with. Like, this massive slowdown you're seeing here, yeah, that's not your YouTube player, and that is not my capture setup. That's one of the fun things about this, is environmental hazards that you can make guys fall off of, which is always lots of fun. But yeah, this massive slowdown is the way the game is. Technos clearly had not totally learned the hardware platform they were working on at this point. I'm actually not sure what chipset this game ran. I should look that up. Oh, sucks to be you, dude. And whenever there is pretty much any enemies, like right here, it's buttery smooth 60 frames a second. But as soon as you get any extra animation going or enemies on screen, this just grinds to powder. And I mean, there are points in this game, actually you're going to see one right here, where this just becomes so poor that, like, were this a home console or a modern title, like right here, this would have been slammed in reviews as being unplayable. But this was just so impressive at the time when it came out that it got forgiven for a lot of things, because just few games looked as good as this one did at the time. And I mean, it's still alright. It definitely, the gameplay of it is pretty basic. Like, a lot of better brawlers have come out since, including a lot by Technos. Like, this is the company, I'm sad these guys aren't around anymore, because this is the company that came up with, oh, I'm dead. This is the company that did River City Ransom very shortly after this, actually. And River City Ransom is one of my favorite games ever, and one of the best NES titles ever, in my humble opinion. And that was made by these same guys. You know, they also did Combat Tribes, which is another great beat 'em up that I really liked. And actually, there are other Double Dragon games as well. It's actually a very weird history that Double Dragon has, because there was this one, there was the NES version of this one, which we'll get to shortly. There was also Double Dragon 2, which did get an arcade release. The arcade version looked a lot like this. It looked and played a lot like this. It was pretty much a direct sequel. And yeah, that god-awful noise is not a glitch. That's actual... Yeah, that's that elevator. So you can hear how bad some of the sound design was in this, too. And Double Dragon 2, actually, the NES version of Double Dragon 2 was far better than the arcade version. Funny enough. And there was a Double Dragon 3 as well, which I don't know much about, but it wasn't very highly regarded. Like, no one paid much attention to it. They also did, if you can believe it, a Double Dragon game for the Neo Geo platform, which came out in arcades in 1995, and it was actually a fighting game. Like, and I mean fighting not as in like it was another Brawler. I mean it was a fighting game, like Street Fighter kind of fighting game, which was very weird because Technos had no real experience with fighting games up till that point. But they, and I believe if it was not their last game, it was one of their last games. And it was one of a couple of titles they did, including a brutally hard version of Super Dodgeball that they also did for the Neo Geo platform. As a whole, Technos is a really weird company. And they kind of were bright and then sort of faded away fairly quickly, sadly, which is a real shame because what they did very, very well. But as you can see, you know, as a premier title, this is pretty basic stuff. It's, you basically punch, you kick. If you can get in close to a guy, you can sort of grab him in a headlock and do some extra hits on him. There is a jump, but you'll almost never want to use it because you can't change your direction mid-jump, and there's no jump attacks either. So it kind of, the jump is really kind of useless except for environmental traversal and whatnot. Almost beat the high score there. Oh well. And down we go. So you get the basic idea here. I mean, it's very good for nostalgic purposes, and I think it is an important title from the perspective of learning sort of where the Brawler genre did not started, because this is definitely not where it started, but this is kind of where it really started to gain popularity. A lot of people would say that Double Dragon is responsible for the Brawler kind of taking off. And that's very historically important, given, especially for me, given what a fan of Brawlers I am, and the fact that, sadly, this genre has, by and large, died off today, with a couple of exceptions. But, yeah, it's... Unfortunately, it's just not what it used to be, you know. I mean, this game, I played this game a bunch in the arcades when it was new, and I was a very big fan of it. And I remember this game actually got some press in the whole ridiculous games cause violence argument, because it's actually this was if you can believe it, this was considered pretty violent at the time, because it was, you know, the game starts off with a woman getting knocked out by street thugs, and the majority of the game involves beating the crap out of guys, and when they're down on the ground, you can actually see them a little bit bloodied up, and that was very, very edgy at the time. It doesn't mean anything today. I mean, there's mobile games that have, you know, mobile casual games that have more violence in them than this, but this was a big deal at the time. And yeah, it's important for the sort of literacy of the genre, I suppose, but you have better options for this now, for sure. But yeah, that is the arcade version of Double Dragon, but I also promised you that we would take a look at the Nintendo Entertainment System version, and I'm not going to disappoint you there. So, give me just a second, and we will be right back with the NES version. And we're back. Alright, so this is the Nintendo Entertainment System version of Double Dragon, which actually was developed by Technos Japan as well, about a year later. And this one, well, I'll give them credit. This version of the game tries very hard to remain faithful to the original game, but Technos didn't have a lot of experience with the NES at this point. Plus, this is a technologically inferior platform to what they had available to them in the arcade, and it definitely shows in some way. I do think that there are some places this excels over the arcade, though, so allow me to demonstrate. Alright. So, here's deficiency number 1. Graphically, not so hot. Very weird color palette choice. It has this very iconic mission start screen. I'm not sure what their choice was with this, but it's pretty cool. I mean, it was interesting that they did that. The arcade didn't have that. Double Dragon Neon actually pays homage to that, which I thought was kind of neat in their mission screen. But as you can see, we immediately start with enemies on the screen. There's no animation of us coming out of the garage. The garage is there, but there's nothing that comes out of it. And yeah, as you can see, this is just very, very, very basic looking. I mean, it's kind of impressive in some ways. I mean, they maintain the level, you know, a lot of the level design. The music, I think, is actually substantially better. I think it's, it sounds... They use a lot of similar samples to what Capcom used in a lot of their games, and that's very noticeable. And it's much faster beat, you know, much higher energy. I think that's quite impressive in that way. Now, from a gameplay perspective, you are going to notice a couple of differences. Number one, the NES only had 2 buttons, so there's no jump. Which, to be honest, I don't miss, because as I said... Also no kitty in the background, which I have... What the hell's with that, guys? Come on, you could have worked one in there. But yeah, there's no jump in this, but I don't miss it, because as I said before, the jump in the arcade game, kind of pointless. And I just proved myself wrong, because I'm a total idiot. There actually is a jump. Forgive me, I haven't played this in a really long time, so I forgot this. There actually is a jump, which you get by pressing both the punch and kick button simultaneously. Which, given that I played Double Dragon 2 not that long ago, I should have known better than that. But you'll have to forgive me. I'm recording on a Sunday, and it's late, so it's been a long day. Leave me alone. So there is that, but again, does it really matter that much? Not necessarily. You're also going to see that I find the game is very weird with how it takes weapons away from you. So you saw earlier in the level that I picked up a whip similar to this one, which kind of looks like a party favor if you ask me. But when that encounter ended and I moved on to the next screen, it mysteriously disappeared for no particular reason. Whereas in this case, I've gone between multiple groups of enemies and I'm keeping it. But there you go. See this door open and it disappeared. You also notice that I didn't fight any large enemy in that first area before we moved on. So, yeah, that's also missing as well at this stage. And you see here, now, there he is. So they mixed things up a little bit, and they did mix the levels up a little bit too. So you're going to see here that this is a conveyor belt area similar to what we saw previously, but it's a little bit different. Now, you can cheese this guy so that he falls in the hole. Doesn't always work, though. Of course, I can screw myself over by doing that, though. And you see little things like that, like when you die, it just sort of pauses, almost looks like the game's frozen, and then it just sort of spawns you in like it's restaging. It's just not very elegant, you know what I mean? It's just kind of, I don't know, janky, I guess is the word for it. But I mean, the core concepts are still here, and one thing I will give this game for, I will give this game massive kudos for, is that there is very little slowdown in this. I mean, you saw how brutally slow the arcade game got. This one is pretty solid throughout, which is nice. I mean, clearly they knew the limitations of the NES hardware better than they knew the limitations of what they were working with the arcade platform that they had. But you can see here that this game's actually a little bit tougher in some ways too, because see, the thing with games like this, right, is that they are played from a three-dimensional perspective, and that you have your left and your right, but you can also move up and down to different planes of the screen. And enemies can only hit you, and you can only hit them when you're on the same plane. So really what you want to do is, the way you excel at these games is to sort of cheese your way through it by... Oh, nice. You can actually do a jump kick here. This is another thing that you could not do in the arcade effectively. So really what you want to do is you want to cheese them to your plane. You want to be able to close the distance between you and them when you're on different planes so that they don't have the opportunity to hit you early on, and then you want to get in close, quickly line up, and before they can attack you, get one in on them. Which is harder to do with these bigger enemies because they can often still attack you even when you are in the process of landing hits on them. So it can be really tricky. But as you can see here, I'm not doing this very well because I haven't played this in a long time, but you can kind of get a couple of hits in on them and then back off, and then when they try to do their attacks, and you can sort of game the system a little bit there. See, just that very basic mission end where it's just like, yay, you're done, and quickly moving on now. Now, I will say that probably the reason that we get those transition screens cool as they are is because one thing that's neat about the arcade edition of this game is that you kind of move seamlessly between missions. You beat a boss, and the game says, you know, mission 2, and you see your guy walking into the next area, and you just keep going. There's no real interlude, per se. The NES really didn't have the capability to play in a continuous fashion like that, but due to the memory limitations of the system. So that's probably why they had the little mission interlude screen, so that they could say, alright, well, we're going to load in the next palette and the next batch of stuff. And then the box disappeared. Ugh, do not like that at all. And there's the sort of weak sauce explosive thing. You can see that definitely doesn't have the impact that the other game does. And down the pit with you. Love that. So to a certain degree, I mean, that was just the limitations of what they had to work with. And as you can see as well, the AI is simply not as smart in this game. He can't climb the fence, so he's just going to sit there and wait for you. Whereas in the arcade game, they would actually pursue you. So that's another limitation. And it makes this part actually kind of difficult because, as you can see, I need to get in close to him to be able to take him out while he's got that bat. And if I can't get at him in time, he'll get a hit in on me, and that's kind of what happened there, so. Yeah. So, I don't know. As I said, I actually prefer the NES version of Double Dragon 2 more than Double Dragon 1. I actually think that game is pretty good. But, the biggest problem that I have is Double Dragon as a whole. I mean, I wanted to show you both versions of this because it's really weird in that when you were dealing particularly with 16-bit arcade games that came out on 8-bit hardware, like the NES, usually the console version was always superior, and often vastly so. Like, you could go, oh my god, this is a cheap knockoff, you know, this is junk compared to the arcade game, things like that. And really, this was weird because there were elements of the Double Dragon arcade game that were much better than the home game. There were also elements of it that were vastly inferior. The slowdown, the music, arguably the interface. This has, you know, this gives you much more information on the screen. And this is the funny part. So now that guy couldn't scale the fence before, but she can scale the ladder, and now she gets down there, and she's stuck until I come down and try to deal with her. Very weird. Things like that. You know, that's another way that this game really falls short compared to the NES version, or to the arcade version. The fact that your weapons disappear after certain random encounters because I don't know why. Probably due to memory limitations of the NES. Like I said, if this was not Technos' first NES game, it was one of their very early ones, and this just really feels like, you know, Trade West came to them and said, hey, we really, really want this game on the NES, we really want you guys to do a version of it, but they clearly were lacking experience. And we're done. They were clearly lacking experience with the NES in some different ways here. So the NES version also had this Mode B thing, which is a very, very uber rudimentary fighting game. Maybe this is what they took their inspiration from when they decided to make the Double Dragon fighting game for the Neo Geo. I don't know, but I mean, I guess they could put this on the box as saying, hey, look, this is something the arcade game didn't have. If you spent a whole bunch of money on the arcade game, here's why you should buy it again on the NES. Yeah. This is pretty lame, as you can tell here. It's basically trying to take the mechanic. That's the thing. Brawlers and fighting games both involve beating dudes up, but they're vastly different mechanically. And this was trying to take the mechanics of a brawler and make a fighting game out of it, which I can't imagine why that didn't work out so well. But it's very interesting. You know, Double Dragon is very fondly regarded, but it's one of those games, it's one of those series that has a very weird history. Its developer has a very weird history, and the original, at least, I don't know. You may disagree. A lot of Brawler Puritans or historians may disagree, but I honestly don't think it holds up very well. It's just, there are so many other Brawlers, even from the era, that did things better, and I totally get why this was so well regarded and popular in its day. But it really shows its age, and it really shows how a lot of this game's popularity at the time was more style than substance, if you ask me. But I find it fascinating how, despite coming out on an inferior platform for home systems like the NES, how vastly, like, how the differences are obvious, but in some ways there are elements of this that are actually better than the arcade version, despite the arcade version being superior in other ways. It's very odd all around, and I thought it would be a disservice to cover this game without showing both aspects of that. But yeah, that is the original Double Dragon, developed by Technos Japan Corp. May they rest in peace. In 1987 for arcades and in 1988 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Published in North America for arcades by Taito America Corp. And published for the NES by Trade West. May they rest in peace as well. I don't know. Historically important, most certainly, but good overall, I don't know. Maybe history looks on this a little more fondly than I do. My name's Parallax Abstraction. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.